Hi, good day to you, and welcome to another session of Working in UX Design. And today we have Joe Quek, who is the design lead of Automattic. This might be a name that's not familiar to you in terms of the company name itself, but if you've heard or used this product called WordPress, Joe currently works at Automattic that designs and builds and manages WordPress software and system. So she currently manages a team of product designers who works remotely from all over the world, and they build e-commerce software at scale for more than 3 million stores on WordPress. And she has been working on global products, and this will be the focus today of what we will be speaking about, which is designing and launching global products. And we'll be covering as well how to make it work as a remote team and how to maintain that visibility while working remotely as a design team and growing your career so that you can one day to work in a international company like Automattic. So lovely to have you here, Joe. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Daylon. Yeah, very happy to be here to chat with you. Lovely to just talk about these topics, especially I think um, coming from, both of us in Singapore, I feel like we naturally take a very global mindset in almost everything that we do. So I feel like this is very relevant to hopefully other Singapore designers, as well as other designers hoping to work globally. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So, and I think to really start off, Jill has a long history of working on different teams. I think I first discovered Jill and her work while she was working at Zendesk. And before Zendesk, it was just a local startup in Singapore before it got acquired by Zendesk. So I would like to kind of like go back to sort of your time there at Zendesk. How how were sort of like the I would say the years that you spent as a visual and product designer there? How did it shape your perspective designing for a global product? Because you were first
Yeah.
designing more local, for a more local market, and then eventually now after that you had to be international. So tell us more.
Yeah, that was a really, really interesting experience for me as a designer. So for context, I was there 5 years ago. So it's been a minute, but I was there for quite a long time. I was also there for like almost 5 years, I think. Um, so I really saw a lot of different approaches to design, and I also grew a lot as a designer. And I think one of the biggest things was thinking about designing for a global audience and designing across a global team. So both internally within the team and also externally, thinking about the customers that we have. That for me was kind of a bit of a growth period for sure, and something that I hadn't really considered before. So like I had some funny, I was trying to think of like the things that I remember from that time. And I had like some funny stories that I remember. Like for example, when originally we were just working on like visual icons and stuff, um, there was like a some kind of graphic for it was like representing entrepreneurship, okay? And it was like for a Zendesk audience, of Zendesk customers, so a global audience. And one of the illustrators had designed like a little takeout box, like a US takeout box, and they had like the chopsticks sticking straight up. So as everyone probably probably in this call would know, that's like a big no-no for most Asian people, Chinese people, East Asian people, like to have two chopsticks straight up is like it signifies like offering to the ancestors or whatever. And so it's one of those things where I had to very tactfully bring that up to the rest of the team who were based I think at that time in London and SF, and I was like, hey, we can't use this image. And they were like, why? That's such a standard, like that's a very standard illustration that's used elsewhere. And I was like, oh, but yeah, but if we want to be a global team, we need to kind of pivot a little bit of the way that we approach even small things like icons and illustrations. So that was like very interesting for me that I didn't realize that we bring that value. Also, when you have a diverse team, you have the benefit of like a diverse pool of perspectives that you can take from within the team. And so it's like that was one example where I could provide something, but actually there have been many, many examples where there were things that I didn't know, or blind spots that I just didn't have, and I only realized it when someone in my team would raise it. So yeah, I feel like that for me has been a very interesting thing that has constantly been validated through Zendesk and also even now at Automattic. I think it's one of the greatest strengths of working with a global
Mm,
team.
yeah. So I think if I understand what you're trying to say
Mm,
earlier is that like as um people who work and live
mm,
in sort of like a very, very globalized
mm.
city like Singapore, for example, we do have that perspective which we can bring in value
Mm,
add to more international companies, and
yeah.
that's extremely helpful. Yeah, I suddenly just recall the name of the startup, Zopin. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been a name I haven't heard of in a while. So Zopin got acquired by Zendesk,
Mm,
and how was that transition like? Moving from being just a local startup to like suddenly an international company that you have suddenly more layers to work with and report to.
yeah.
Yeah, like how was that transition for you
Mm,
in the team?
yeah. So I didn't join before the acquisition. I joined right after. So it was kind of
Mm,
interesting where my role was approved by I think the new manager in San Francisco. And then yeah, because I think previously they never had like specifically a designer focused in this one area. Um and so that was really interesting where I got to join a team that was kind of had just been acquired. It was still very Zopim-esque, still very startup, still very Singaporean, but was rapidly changing and rapidly expanding also because of the benefit of getting acquired. And it definitely was a lot of growing pains. Like I think that phrase growing pains was something that we said to each other really often. We were like, see, this is the growing pains again. I like, see, this is just like one more thing that is coming out of that rapid expansion and that big mindset shift of being like Singapore startup to part of a global company. And it really was a rapid change. Um, Zenesk at that time was not very corporate. I wouldn't say it was very, very, very corporate at the time. But it definitely was more corporate than like Zopim, again, like Singapore startup, had at that time they had just like they originally started like working in a condo and then like, just like
and
tiny
then went
office,
into like
everybody,
a yeah
yeah.
industrial estate. Yeah.
Yeah, like full on American tech company. It really was quite an interesting clash of cultures, I think. And you saw that in interesting ways, I think both in terms of like how we work and how we like collaborate, but also the kind of communication you need to do. So lots more communication across time zones, across teams, all the way up and down and sideways. Like anyone who's worked in a startup would know it's a very different dynamic working in a corporate environment versus a startup. And at that time when I joined, it really was like just in the middle, transitioning from one to the other. Um, and I think uh we previously we talked about like that value add of that like global mindset. And well, as part of our conversation today, we're also talking about like how to show that in your portfolio. I feel like that was something that I didn't realize was such an important soft skill at the time. That now I would actively look out for in a portfolio where it's like, do you have the ability to sense that like, hey, this needs more communication, or like this is kind of a tricky transition period for this particular team, or like, hey, this project spans many, many different time zones and many different like cultural differences, and can you show me, even in your portfolio, that you understand how to navigate those situations? That to me differentiates a good candidate from a great one. And I think that
Mm,
that was like an experience I really valued, being able to see how different designers navigate that, because I don't think that there's one perfect way, but you have some designers where they navigate it through having like really personal relationships. It's like they develop one-on-one relationships with like people in the local office and then people in the other overseas offices, and they're just really good one-on-one. And you see them actually manage to really advocate for customers through these very personal kind of one-on-one relationships across different teams. And then you also see people take on a different kind of approach, like being very charismatic within the organization and kind of becoming this the loudspeaker that talks a lot about like customer stuff. One of the user researchers that I worked with, she was so creative. She even like at one point she did like little, this was before TikTok, but she did like TikTok style mini videos about customers. And so you find people getting very creative about their communication when they are kind of put in this situation where they have to be, and the culture of the team is rapidly changing. And you're suddenly realizing that, hey, we're having to work in a way that we previously didn't have to work.
Mm.
But how can we rise to this challenge, and how can we kind of find new ways to navigate it?
Yeah, and I guess that was kind of like a crash course for COVID, right? Because then COVID came and all of us have to work
That's very true.
remotely.
That's very,
So
very true,
yeah, like
actually.
I'm quite curious. Like, you're probably one of the first people we interview that explicitly say, "Hey, communication skills are really important," and I have it at one top of mind, especially for my team. So I'm wondering what you're looking out
Mm,
for when you're hiring,
yeah,
and yeah, how do you spot like a great and from a great candidate from a pool of okay or good candidates?
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's such a good question. And I'm surprised that I would be the first, but for me it really is like number one. So I it makes sense that I think it would matter more to a team like Automattic compared to a
Mm,
different team, because it really is like if you are not very intentional and very proactive about it, when you're working remotely with people, you just can get very isolated and can become very difficult to get anything done. So you do have to be very proactive and very confident in communicating. Yeah, so to your question of like what do I look out for? Well, at first glance in any portfolio for me, it's like one of my top, I think I just wrote like a thing like maybe last year for our hiring team about like for me, what are the green flags in like portfolios? And for me, writing was the number one green flag,
mm,
was one of the top ones that I had. Writing really well, but also with personality, which is very funny, by the way, in today's day and age with like AI stuff, because I I can okay, AI to me now is at a point where I think you can use it really powerfully to help your writing in your portfolio. But I also think people either don't use it well enough, so it becomes very obvious that it's written by AI, and then that starts to work against you. Because sometimes I was just reviewing a bunch of portfolios like a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, oh, I feel like this was written by AI and it had very little human personality, but I don't know, maybe it's not written by AI. And then I just like I couldn't get a sense of the candidate. And so I was like, and the feeling was like, maybe not, like not sure, not sure.
mm,
Not sure. It's
yeah.
not a bad thing to me if you use AI to help you to write, not inherently a
Mm,
bad thing, but it's like if it obscures your personality and your
mm,
sort of humanity from me, that's tough. Like I will skim a lot of portfolios sometimes, but the one that I do not skim is the about page. For me, that's like
mm,
I always read that and I always take note of how they talk about themselves and like how they talk about
mm,
what they care about in their work. And it's like if you use AI to write it to me, I mean, yeah, if people do, right? But it's like
yeah.
I want to get a sense of you. I want to get a sense of like personality. And it's so sad, I think, when you read something that feels AI generated and just feels like it has nothing of themselves in it, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. That for me is like a big one. Yeah, and to the point of like communicating creatively, I do like it when I see like candidates who go on podcasts or like, record themselves talking about or try to create content or whatever. I think it's cool. Like I like that you're trying to communicate something and I want to see how you do it, right? It doesn't mean it has to
Mm,
be amazing, but I want to read your article. I want to see your like creep on your
thoughts, your
Instagram.
perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to hear what you think. So I like that. People who seem excited to talk to other people, even if
Mm,
it is in a way that is, or even more so if it's in a way that's asynchronous. Like
mm,
it's, yeah.
yeah, just like
So
a recording.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Fun fact, I was in a mid-career transitioner myself into tech. I don't think a lot of people know this before started teaching UX, but the person who hired me for my first product role also read my about us, and he said there was a statement that really stood out for me in your about us, because I was like trying to write and I was like, okay, I think I should write something along the lines of what I deeply care about. So I wrote, I deeply care about this. And I think that really stood out for him and got me like a much longer interview. So I'm glad that
Yeah.
like my SVP from the past, you also spot that for candidates. And I think that's so important. And being able to write well, being able to write with personality, I think that's quite hard. Takes a certain type of person to write well, but certainly I can understand why it's important in an international company like yours. Um, do you also see that people who tend to communicate well and write well, even if they are designers, tend to grow much faster in their career?
Oh, yeah. I that's an interesting question. And I do think that is so true. Um, I would say one thing that I would like disagree with myself when it comes to like does good communication or proactive communication lead to like faster growth in a career? I think generally yes. But um there's this like really interesting thing that I was recently thinking about and talking about with another designer, which was the trap of being in some ways
Visible.
too communicative. Yeah, or like, or not too communicative, but like too like being always the one who's like calling stuff out or being always the one
Mm,
who is kind of like criticizing something or like being the one who's like, was it we should improve this, we should improve this. And
mm,
to clarify that, I think what we discussed was like there's nothing wrong with, obviously it's a good thing if you're a person who's like, hey, this should be improved, and like, hey, this can't work because this, hey, have we considered this? Hey, let's bring so and so into this conversation. Hey, let's improve the communication with this. Like it usually is a good thing. But I think there is an interesting point where it becomes sometimes not a good thing and it becomes
mm,
a barrier to actually moving forward.
mm,
Um, so like uh I'll give you an example. I was reading so in the automatic design the hiring process, because we work so strangely, uniquely, and we're so asynchronous in our communication. So we work like essentially you write like essays about your work and then you post
mm,
it and then everybody comes on to like give comments because we try to reduce meetings because we're so
mm,
globally distributed. So our hiring process involves a trial, which includes it's a paid trial, and people have to essentially work the way that we work in some degree. So they have to like write long essays about their work, and they have to talk about they have to write about their explorations and write about their response to a design brief. And there was this one really interesting candidate that I still think about now. I think it was like a few years ago, actually, but I still think about this person now, where it's like they were so good at communicating verbally. They were so good at communicating even by Slack, because part of the hiring process also involves like a Slack conversation. Um, but when they started writing through their thoughts, they were so verbose and they were so exhaustive that it actually became very difficult to understand
Mm,
what they felt about a situation, like what was their kind of like next step forward and what was their educated opinion on a
mm,
certain problem. So it's kind of cool where or interesting where it's like they did really well in terms of like exhausting all the edge cases or whatever, but it was a struggle to feel like this person could thrive in our environment because they communicated too much. So I think there's like a part
mm,
of like, yes, you have to communicate a lot, but you also have to you need to know how to synthesize, you need to know how to converge, you need to know how to like get to a point and be like, this is where we're moving forward from, and you drive your whole team forward, right?
mm. Yeah, I think that's definitely a very rare skill. I've read myself, I've read in articles that um the way you write is the way you think, right? So how
Ooh,
clearly you write is
yeah,
how clearly you think, or
yeah,
how poorly you write is how
yeah,
poorly you think, right? And how unstructured
can
your
be,
thoughts are. Yeah.
yeah,
So that's kind of also as I hire as a business leader as well, I do also kind of
yes,
look out for such skills,
yeah,
especially if it's client facing roles and
mm,
customer service roles.
that's
Mm,
true. Yeah.
so I'm wondering, I mean, you're based in Singapore, you're working for an international organization like Automattic, HQ is in the US, but your majority of your time you're away from, I guess, the nexus of power where all the senior management team members are. So, how do you maintain a level of visibility uh, for your team or for your work while working remote? Because I think in the US it's more common for people to work remote, but
Mm,
it's remote within the US itself, so it's not so far
yeah.
away. So I'm quite curious
Yeah.
how you manage to consistently demonstrate your team's value, right?
Yeah.
And visibility. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, I think, true for a lot of remote companies as well, the global ones, where you do tend, when you're in Singapore, you do tend to be further away in time zone and just pure miles away from where most of the leadership sits. I think for me, the first thing is the culture of the company. So Automatic really does value a globally distributed team, and they've been remote only since day one. So it's been like, I don't know, almost 20 years of fully remote work. So I do think it is different in the sense that they are very aware of the visibility problem and there are steps that are taken to try to mitigate it. So like having I mean, for example, it's like sometimes we have town halls where, different the groups of different teams or the whole company gathers, and sometimes it's in the APAC time zone, even if they know that they're only going to get half the number of attendees that they would usually get. Recordings of things are almost immediately uploaded with transcriptions because they know that APAC is going to like hop on and watch it later. Um, yeah, a lot of things are just recorded, lots of notes, a lot of transparent note taking, a lot of transparency in general, and a higher level of emphasis of like, I would say like every 3 to 6 months, we get somebody from some kind of senior leadership role who like reminds everybody to default to public, like don't hide it in a private channel, don't hide it in a private meeting, talk about it publicly, post about it publicly, like don't leave it in a place where people who are not there can't have visibility into it. So that's like a really big priority in terms of communication. And I do think that makes a massive difference. Um, but yeah, it still, I think even with that, even having that for me is like the kind of like it has to be there at a base level. Otherwise, I don't think it works well at
Mm,
all. Um, but even with that there, I think there's a lot more like one-on-one communication that has to happen, even synchronous meetings that have to happen where you're meeting with your heads of design or your heads of product units, business units to like talk about specific projects one-on-one. Like I feel like realizing that there's a limit to asynchronous communication, realizing that sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and go for the 10 p.m. meetings sometimes is like a thing that we just accept. And I think what's nice about working in a global team is that people are very flexible about like taking turns on that. So it's like sometimes I'll be in the 10 p.m., sometimes somebody else will be in the 10 p.m. meeting. And they're very aware that like, hey, let's not always keep it at one time. So I have multiple meetings which are alternate. So they alternate between like okay for APAC and Europe, and then the next one is okay for Americas, but everybody else has to tune in later. And then it actually toggles. So like 1 week on, 1 week off. So it's very intentional, I think, in terms of like acknowledging that we need that synchronous time, we need that synchronous conversation. Um, yeah, but we also want to make it like not too hard for people to even to get that FaceTime, Zoom time, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and I think when it comes to making design work visible in general, I feel like so much of managing up and managing a team and making that work visible does come down to like a good design lead, um, really understanding why their team is working on the things that they're working on. Like if you don't have that in your design manager, that can be very, very difficult for you as a designer. So I would say like for like when I join a team or when I am talking to friends who are thinking about is this team a good team to join, I would say one of the key things is like, does the person who's managing you and the person who's going to help make your work visible, do they seem like they know why their team's working on the projects that they're working on? Do they know why these things are important? And are they able to connect it back to the priorities of the org in general?
Mm.
Are they able to connect it back to like the other priorities of other heads of functional teams? Like
Mm.
are they able to talk to data and understand what they need to get from the whole data
Mm.
team so that they can make the design work, they can show the impact of the design work. Like that is the job of your manager, I think, to a degree. I mean, it is sometimes falls on the individual contributor as well, but I also think as the design manager, design lead, that is part of the job. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna summarize a bit for the benefit of audiences who are looking
Please do.
to work remotely and build a remote team like Automattic to make it work. I think some of the key things that I picked up from listening to Joe is that there needs to be a level of transparency that's required in the company by default so that people share and people have that culture of sharing information. The second piece is actually a culture of documentation, being able to record things, being able to document things, being able to transcribe things very easily so people from different time zones can pick it up. And last of all, naturally, everyone who's hired and who works in a company need to have a level of empathy for the others because I think it can get quite tough if you are the one or two person in the APAC time zone and you'll be asked to make accommodations rather than the other way around. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's really helpful that Jill was able to share that by default, and it's also something you should look out for when you're joining teams and if they offer you a remote role. Just also try and understand whether they have some of these existing structures in place. It's very interesting that you point out like the job of a design leader goes way beyond ensuring good work is done by the team, but also connecting the dots to other leaders and making sure the team, if I understand from what you said, is relevant, right? And continues to be relevant in the organization. That's an extremely difficult thing to justify and do, especially today when there is Gen AI and budgets are cut, right? Yeah, what's your sense and how do you think what should we do if we're a design leader, right? And we're trying to make this work. Yeah.
Yeah. I do feel it is one of the hardest parts of managing a design team and uh especially in like today. Gestures, gestures at the world around us. Yeah, I do feel it is one of the most difficult things, but also one of the most important. I'm trying to think of like examples where I've seen it done really, really well. And also maybe examples where I've seen it
Yeah,
done less well.
yeah, certainly. As you were thinking about it, I saw on LinkedIn like a couple of weeks or months ago, like someone saying designers don't need to keep justifying themselves and why they need to exist, right? Because they like if the organization already understands the value, they understand the value. If they don't, they don't, right? So I mean that's one perspective, that's one point of view. But I also feel that yeah, we're in a very interesting time where there's a lot of disruption happening. It's a recessionary market. So I don't know how to put it. I mean, surely something must be done
Mm,
as because
yeah,
we are leaders, right? So we carry that burden. Yeah.
it's true. I mean, yeah, it's like to that to that LinkedIn post that you saw. I would also say like that to me would be maybe the point that I would get at a certain bit. Like there's two paths, right? Like if the leadership team that you're working with doesn't seem to understand the value of either the whole design team or like some part of the design team or some part of the design process or whatever. Maybe you're trying to justify more research, maybe you're trying to justify more hiring, more dedicated people on whatever section of the product. There's two possibilities. Either they understand it completely and they simply do not value it, which is fair. Like, that can be true that they hear you, they understand it, they just do not value it right now. Or maybe they do value it, but they have much more other important priorities that just need to be dealt with. And if you've worked with enough companies, you know that there are phases, right? There are phases where innovation and like design quality is the most important thing. And then there are phases where, hey, we just need to get the revenue numbers up and like actually all this other stuff. We just need to ship right now. Like, and it's also, I think, on your part as like a design lead or a designer to be like, hey, do I understand what phase my product is in? Do I understand what phase my leadership team is in? Do I understand that this is rarely a permanent state, but it's sort of depending on other things that they're dealing with. And it's not all starting and ending with design, right? But like it depends a lot on what's happening with the business, what's happening with the industry, what's happening more broadly in the world, right? Like a lot of things can impact what are the priorities of your leadership team. So it could be that they fully understand your argument and they are just deprioritizing it for now, in which case it's like, cool. Like in some ways, I would say you've done your job. Now the task is to understand the priorities of your leadership team and try to help those priorities instead of whatever thing that you think is the most important for design in general. And okay, that's one possibility. The other possibility is I think they just don't know, right? Like they don't know why is it important to have a design system. They don't know why it's important to have more discovery research. They don't know why it's important for us to validate a feature before we, to do like more market research before we start working on a feature. They don't know. They've never worked in that way. They don't know how powerful it can be. And then I would say then your job as a design manager is to educate. Like that is part of your role, even if no one has told you that's part of your role. Your job is to spot the gap and spot the knowledge gap to be like, as you talk to people, be like, oh, I think there is something that I think you don't know that you don't know. And I'm going to now take it on me to teach our organization about this thing so that we can then now agree, okay, we fully understand it. Should we prioritize this approach? Or we can say, nah, we got other priorities. Or we can say, yes, now that we fully understand the importance of whatever design thing, we want to prioritize it, right? So I think that there's two possibilities. And both things I would say strong design leadership should know how to handle and should know how to handle with some degree of confidence and collaboration and like openness with the rest of the design team.
Yeah, I really like that. I wouldn't necessarily term it as commercial acumen, but it's like I think from what you're describing, it's like commercial awareness, just understanding this is
Yeah,
what the season is about,
yeah,
and being deeply aware about
yeah,
the constraints that you have to face and working with the right stakeholders to
yeah,
make things work, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Did you had to maybe ever had you've gone through a few business cycles yourself. You had ever had to make a decision to like downsize the team or work with a much tighter constraint to make things work?
Mm.
How did you manage that? Yeah.
Yes. Thankfully, I've never had to actively downsize a team that I've managed, but we have had a few seasons of like we're gonna slow down hiring or we're not hiring at all, or we have to kind of um counsel people out or like ask them to leave. Unfortunately, I always feel like those are it's like it's like the worst part of the job, obviously. Um, and it is, but I think it's also the part of the job that can either be done with a lot of growth on both your part and your team's part and whoever's the individual designer you're working with, or it can be botched in like really horrific ways. And I think a lot of us would have seen or experienced, sadly, examples where that happens. And so I think for me personally, it's always like a thing where I'm like, okay, it's a season of growth for myself and whoever I'm having to work with, whoever is being impacted by these constraints or these like circumstances. Um, and yeah, I mean, like it's just really difficult, I would say. And I do feel like the season that we're in the design industry and the tech industry, we're sort of there, and we have to kind of be comfortable having these harder conversations about like, hey, is the team even growing? Do we have enough, like business wise, do we even have enough to sustain the kind of team that we have? Um, do we have enough space to innovate in all the things we want to innovate on? Do we have enough resources to spare to do all the projects that we want to do and to, kind of embark on our ideal design process that we would all actually prefer to do that really enables us to build like the best product ever. And sometimes that is just isn't possible. And then we have to think about like, okay, how can we get much more uh good at saying no to certain things? How can we get much more conservative about how we are planning a project? How can we accept that sometimes, some things we just have to let go of, or some things just are not going to get the kind of love that it needs. And then I think as the design lead or as the manager, your job is to not necessarily I would say not to try to do it yourself, which I've seen some managers try to do. Also, not to try and force your team to be like, hey, I know you have less people now, but you got to work like twice as hard. No, I don't think that that's a good approach either, for the long term. I think your job is to kind of count the loss. Your job is to observe and document the loss. Like, so if you know that, like, hey, these three teams are working without designers and the stuff that they're shipping never gets a designer to see it. And it's because we're not hiring and it's because we let some people go and it's because whatever. Hey, does everybody know that these features are actually getting shipped without a designer? Are we aware of that? Can we track like how they're performing? It's like as a design manager, maybe we can't hire, but can we show that this is the impact of us not hiring? This is the impact. This is what we're giving up because we're not able to do more research. This is the impact. This is the inefficiency that's caused because we're not able to work more extensively on a design system or whatever. Like that's sort of the job of a manager when you're in that season. You're there to document the loss in a way or document the gap. Yeah.
That's such an interesting way to put it. It's almost like you're almost like a journalist or even like a historian that sort of like presents that data back and say, hey, we need we need these people back.
Yeah.
The product needs some love.
Yeah.
yeah, before it gets shipped out.
Yeah.
Um,
And if
mm,
you have, like you said, that commercial acumen and you are keeping like tabs on the pulse of your business, you can know that at some point, hopefully, things will turn around and there will be a moment where this is the right moment for you to bring it up and for you to be like, hey, we've been working at this like reduced capacity for X amount of time. Um,
mm,
we have accepted that these are the things that we sacrifice, but now can we reinvest in them? And I do think that it's a lot of things function, like you said, in cycles as a pendulum.
mm,
There's different phases in a business and a team and a business unit and within a leadership team where you will see that pattern. And it's like, as I think you join in more teams or like talk to more people, you get a bit of a sense of it, especially if you stay in a specific team for
mm.
a longer time. You get a sense of it, and then you know, like, okay, now it's the moment. Now let's talk about it. Like we
Yeah,
gotta improve on this.
I
Yeah.
think it also takes a number of years to understand and sense
Yeah,
and go through those business cycles to be able to spot it, like
that's
you shared.
true.
And you're very experienced in design leadership. I'm just wondering how how do you how can one evolve if I'm an individual contributor or I'm recently asked to take on a design leadership or design manager role, or because just because no one is there trying to lead or lead the team properly,
Mhm.
I have to step up. How can I better prepare myself? Because it like all the things you said make sense, but I don't have the experience, right?
Yeah,
It's not like I can
yeah.
read a book. I don't know. Is there a book that I can read
I don't
to
think
just get all of these
I
things?
don't think I don't know if there is. But well, firstly, I don't feel like I'm that experienced. I feel like there are so many more people that I still learn from and that I still am so inspired by who are so much more, I don't know if they're just great at like showing it on the surface, but like they just seem so much more confident and so much more able to handle like all kinds of situations that I would be like, oh my gosh, how did you even navigate that? So I still feel like I'm learning so much. But one thing that I kind of was thinking about the other day was, you know how like when you're an IC and you're doing visual design and everybody is like, there's that famous, oh gosh, I can't remember who said it, but there's that famous like thing about taste and developing taste and like the gap between where you want to be and where you're at is how well you've developed your taste. And I think that's very easy to say about design because it's so tangible, it's so visual, it's so like right in front of you. And to me, I feel like design management or design leadership is it has that too. You have to, it's a separate taste you have to develop. It's like the taste of, I was going to say taste of humans. That sounds weird. We're not tasting humans, anybody. But like in a way, like what does a good team feel like? What does a thriving team look like? When you talk to someone that you're managing and they are just like killing it and they're just thriving and they're doing so well and they're growing so much, what does that sound like? And what does it sound like when your leadership team really values what you're bringing to the table? What does that look like? How do you see that in these like very intangible and very kind of like not visual ways, right? So it's different from design, where I think a design you can develop that taste because you just like look and look and look and you feed your eyes all these things, and then you develop this taste visually. But with people, you have to be a lot more, I guess, nosy. You have to be a lot more like observant about things that you don't see, maybe, but like just ways people interact, how people talk about a person. And I think when you develop that taste of like, ooh, this is what a good team feels like. This is what a happy team feels like. This is what great work looks like. This is what a team that is growing and thriving and is really valued. This is what it feels like to be in this team. And I think once you have like that little spark of a taste, you can understand like, okay, if I'm now in a team that's not like that, how do I get it to that? Um, and that's like a big part of it. And I think a lot of it is like observing great managers, observing also people maybe who are not so good at managing, yet observing mistakes that other people make, observing the mistakes you make, right? Obviously, and being super, super, super reflective on that. And it's harder than developing taste for design to me. Like to me, like taste for design is already such a personal thing. Like we already kind of don't like to kill our babies, right? Like we love our design work, and sometimes we don't want to
Yeah.
kill off our best ideas. To me, this is even more personal because it becomes about you as a person and how you relate to other people and how you relate to like a whole group of people, how you
Mm.
manage people down, up, sideways. Like it becomes a lot more internal rather than just something you're creating on a screen. It becomes very, very reflective to me of like,
Yeah.
okay, who am I as a leader? What kind of leader do I want to be? What kind of team do I want to build? What does it feel like to build a team that I'm proud of? What is it like to manage people who I can really mentor and who really value like the managerial relationship that we have? What does that feel like? And how do I push myself to be that person? I think it's yeah, to me harder
Mm.
than learning
Yeah. I
design.
definitely agree. I have a follow-up question for you on that actually. But before that, I think what you have shared about developing a taste in of people, right?
Humans.
Not literally, but yeah, like it's kind of like in every sport, you need to have a sense, right? Like if you play basketball, you need to have what we call court sense and need to be
Yeah,
aware where everyone is,
yeah,
what does a good team look like? And
yeah,
as you said, how does it perform? And you can watch the greats do it live on television and you
yeah,
get a good sense, okay, this is a pro level team doing it. But for the rest of us who don't have an opportunity to
mm,
join a pro level team or be part of a pro level team, um, I'm kind of curious how what's a heuristic or is that something that you ask in interviews or you try and sense as part of the process before joining a team that hey these people really this is a good leader or um yeah like or this person that you're hiring they have leadership potential. Yeah, how what just kind of curious about the
yeah.
heuristics that you use.
Man, that's a good question. I wish that was. I would love like that's such a good question,
I'm
and that
helping
would
you
be.
unpack it.
Oh yeah, I love
Maybe
I
the
love
answers are
this.
somewhere there.
I really like that, and I think you're so right that everyone. It's one of those things that everyone to a degree, I think, evaluates, but people don't know how to articulate. And maybe it's not even, maybe some part of it's not even possible to articulate, right? And people talk about it like, oh, is it a fit? Like whether you're evaluating a candidate or you are the candidate and you're evaluating a team, like I'm sure you and like a lot of other people have been in a situation where it's like you see a great team and it feels great, but you're just like, why does it feel icky? Like, why does
Yeah,
it?
like it doesn't pass the vibe
Yeah.
check, but
Yeah,
but
like
then all
why?
the data seems correct though. Like yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think it is a little bit of that. And for me, um, I'm trying to think if there were like little things that told me one way or the
Yeah.
other.
I was telling this to my team the other day. I was like, one of the things I really wish I got better at earlier in my career is improving my bullshit meter. Not my propensity to bullshit, but but like actually telling if someone is bullshitting me. Um, actually. So
Yeah.
you know, and I don't I mean it in a very professional way as well. I
Yeah.
mean, there are people who they may not be exaggerating, but they're very charming and they're extremely charming to the extent whereby you can't actually tell whether this person is actually telling the truth or a half truth, right? And that's when it's suddenly like within your vibe. or gut, it doesn't really sit well with me as a manager, and I'm sure for you as well. So yeah, I think it takes time to develop this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
true. And I think also like I don't love the obviously I think I don't love like I've been in hiring processes where you have to do like long whiteboarding interviews, like, multiple ones. And I think nobody really likes that. It can be very taxing, but I do appreciate that opportunity to get like a sense maybe of the people that I might work with. Like, how do they react when you disagree? How did they react? Like, I remember we were interviewing someone once previously with a whiteboarding exercise, and sometimes if I can, I will try to disagree with them very intentionally and be like, I really don't agree with that approach that you take. And you do see people kind of reacting to it in very different ways, right? I mean, of course, you say it nicely, like, "Oh, really? I wouldn't pick that," And some people get very, very defensive, and some people get very, very reflective, and they're like, "Oh, wait, tell me more," and they become a lot more curious. And I think even and I mean, the hiring process if it needs to be said, it's a very artificial environment. Like it's not, sometimes once you develop a better relationship with people, your interactions will definitely be different. And of course, people are stressed in the interviewing process. But but I think there is that thing of like, how do people react when you disagree with them, when you say no, or if you have a difference, yeah, have some kind of a difference, or if you um maybe say something that is or like somebody say something that you don't agree with, like do you feel safe in an interview session as the candidate to be like, no, I don't know, that's not really how I would work. I think if you have that, again, it's so intangible, right? But if you have that feeling of like, oh, I actually feel okay to say this to these people in the room, then I think that's a good sign. But if you're like,
Mm,
wait, this just feels like the vibes are all off and like, I don't know, it
yeah,
doesn't feel like a good fit.
yeah.
Yeah, then I think to me there's like something in that lack of, I don't know, lack of like psychological safety sometimes in a
Understand.
team that you
Yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah. I guess with sort of like different contexts, different results
Yeah.
in mind at the
Yeah.
background. It sounds like you would appreciate if, let's say, you put the candidate under pressure or you disagree with the candidate, you would appreciate someone who is reflective, and you would appreciate someone who is maybe not just immediately agree to that point of view, but also share their point of view in a professional way. Would that be true?
Yeah, totally. And I also think that like sometimes oftentimes it may not actually be on the individual. Like I
Mm,
think this is a bit idealistic maybe, but like I kind of
mm,
take the point of view that most people want to show up with curiosity and with like calmness, and most people want to have a conversation about things. Most designers especially, I think designers all good designers, I think, love feedback, even if it is spoken a little bit harshly or even if they don't agree with it. I think almost all designers like to have feedback. So yeah, I kind of feel like it's often not on the individual to create the space for that kind of easy communication. Yeah, and sometimes it's not a sign that like, oh, the candidate is bad. It's just like, hey, maybe the environment isn't quite right, or like maybe there was some
yeah,
reason they couldn't. And I
that's why
think
it's
that,
quite
yeah,
contextual, as you said. Yeah.
exactly,
Mm.
for
So
sure.
yeah, I think earlier you were talking about, as an IC, as an individual contributor, all you need is good taste, right? And developing that good taste, being able to do and deliver good work, being able to communicate and show that you're effective at what you do, that sort of like um, would help you with your growth. But then as you get into a manager, you kind of need to develop a good sense of people and putting teams together and working with them and kind of and helping to navigate the political structures and the constraints in the organization.
Yeah.
Um, and there's no book written about it. You probably have to read a lot of books and talk to a lot of people. Um,
Mhm.
how how do you grow? How do you grow from IC to manager, or how is Automatic doing that? Yeah.
Automatic in particular is a little bit of a unique case, or maybe not that unique now. I've heard that this is more and more common, but basically, most of our managers are hybrid team leads, so we do some IC work. So the percentage kind of varies, but it can be anywhere from like 1/3 of your time doing IC work to 2/3 of your time doing IC work, depending on how big your team is, depending how many people you're managing. Um, but yeah, so basically, for me, I'm in a hybrid role right now. So I do IC work and I do management at the same time. Currently, my team is a team of five. So it's a good size, I feel, where I still get to like know each person individually. Um, but yeah, so most of the managers are hybrid. And so it is that path is sort of very clear, where it's like you start off as an IC and then as you take on a little bit more like mentorship of other designers or peer mentorship, or you take on like bigger projects and you lead bigger projects, then you step into people manager roles. Um, yeah, and it's hybrid. Yeah. So I think for me in general, when I see people who are like going from an IC role to a manager role, there's kind of three things that I try to advise people to look out for. So first is the people side. So thinking about other humans and other people in your team besides your immediate collaborators. So thinking about like the other designers, thinking about like how um how hiring happens, thinking about again like developing taste, what does a good team feel like? That's the people side to me. And then the second thing is the product. So developing really sound and informed opinions about your product. So maybe that's the commercial acumen side, the product thinking side, the business strategy side. So developing more on that side of things. And then the third thing would be processes. So the third thing is kind of around like systems. So like thinking about how your team communicates work or gives feedback or does reviews. So these are kind of the three things that I generally for myself I focused on, and also what I kind of advise others who want to go from like IC to manager. These are the three: people, product, process. Usually if you're just focused on like a senior IC role, I think generally you may focus on these, but less maybe so on the people side, more on the product side, more on the product side, and maybe a bit more on the processes, but less so on the people. I think with if you're looking for like a managerial role, then the people side becomes a lot more important.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the three Ps. And as one of my last couple of questions I want to ask is that it's so competitive out there right now, to be getting a role in design, and even seniors are asking for help. Uh, what should someone look out for when they're preparing a portfolio or profile that takes into consideration that three Ps that would maybe enable them to be hired by a good company like Automatic? Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So recently, I don't know if you saw, but like a bunch of us got together to do like a portfolio review. So we organized it. And that was fun. Like a bunch of Singapore designers were kind of
Like
reviewing.
all already existing practitioners.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, one of the things that kind of came up that I thought was interesting was we talked about the difference between preparing a portfolio for an IC versus a senior, like staff level IC versus design manager versus like hybrid role, and like how you would present yourself essentially in these various roles and depending on what you're trying to get. And so I think that to me is the first question actually when you are preparing your portfolio. If there is a difference and it is not it is not good. Like I've seen some really interesting portfolios where they are obviously very, very senior, but they position themselves almost like junior or like mid-level designers. And I just don't know whether that was like what had worked for them in the past, or like maybe they haven't seen staff level design portfolios, or they haven't been, given the opportunity to like look through an actual presentation, like like when you're in the hiring process where you present your work, how differently people position themselves. Um, and I just find that like such an interesting thing. And it's the biggest like wasted opportunity to me because you see like people who obviously have like years of experience, but they just don't know how to highlight that they were really strong leads and they know how to bring in the right level of big picture thinking to like small details and sweating the details and they don't know how to show that balance that I'm sure they did in their day-to-day work, but because they don't present it well, they lose out to like somebody who does present it well. So for me, that's like the big things to know how you're positioning yourself and then to look specifically for portfolios that fit that role. Like if you're looking for a manager role, do not position yourself as just a senior design lead. It's not gonna fit. And you're gonna lose out to somebody who does position themselves very clearly as like, with all the managerial experience, even with case studies about being a manager rather than case studies about a project. It can be really, really different. And then I think the second thing for me, which I have seen kind of again, that swinging pendulum thing, there's definitely been a dip in visual design, I feel, uh, of portfolios that I was reviewing. I don't know whether it was maybe just that coincidentally, but uh yeah, it's just something that I've observed where I feel like visual design standards have kind of dipped, or people try to talk a lot more about the UX side and the research side and the product side, and the visual side actually starts to kind of be lacking. You don't get that wow visual thing anymore, or much less. And I feel like that's so important to be a differentiator when you are, again, in a very competitive environment where, yeah, everybody's just amazing. It's true. It's a very tough job market. And I think that is a big differentiator when you have like just a visual design that's just like wow. Yeah.
What was there a third thing or
No, just
well,
two.
okay, so just this two. No worries. I think that's really great advice in general. And like we covered so much today, from working remote to actually growing from an IC to a manager to actually building some of this sense. And I I I ask this as a last question usually in my interviews. I if you were to give, you know, um, if your younger self was to start out right now and in this industry to get into the UX design industry, or is kind of struggling to be a new design manager, what what advice would you give to this younger self? Yeah.
Nice question. I like it. I was gonna make a joke and be like, quit immediately. No, no, no. Like,
There
just
are
kidding.
options. There's two options,
Just
right?
kidding. I love
Either you're already not in the industry or you're already in and you're like a new manager. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Um, um, no, uh I really love design. I always feel so lucky that like this is what we get to do. I feel like it brings so much joy to me personally, and it almost feels a bit selfish, that I get to like my job so much. Um, so yeah, I feel like I was saying this the other day as well. But yeah, I just feel like so much of the choices that I made in my career and the things that paid off and the things that 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 I feel happy about now, it's because like I kind of followed what was a good vibe, like what felt good and what brought me sparked joy, like what I enjoyed. And I think if you try to follow that, I mean that's so cliche, but I really do. I think I would tell myself to believe in that a little bit more because I think it can be very hard. It can be very, very difficult to really listen to yourself and to reflect inwardly to be like, hey, do I even like this thing? And is this a thing that I'm just taking because other people would think it's a good opportunity? Or like, is this a thing I'm doing because, oh, someone told me I should do it? Um, this is a thing that seems safe. I think that we are often confronted with these things, and it can be for sure like a privilege to sometimes say, like, hey, I'm gonna not do this thing, even if it, pays more or whatever, because it just doesn't feel good. But I think that uh yeah, for me, that's what I would tell myself, just because I
Mm,
feel like that has served me so well. Um, and I've regretted the times where I didn't listen, and I kind of knew that like, hey, this feels a bit off, but like I'll just continue, you know. And I think learning to listen to your own voice is really important. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's such a great ending because first of all, it's like being true to yourself. That's sort of the message I'm getting. But it's also so not easy to build that capacity. Almost feels like you have to work on yourself and be very objective and very quiet to
Yeah,
be able to take all of that in. And we talk a
for
little bit about
sure.
it, right? Like
Mm,
sensing people requires us
yes.
to also work on ourselves and be
Yeah.
neutral. Having a good sense of product requires us to build a certain level of intuition about
Yeah.
business and design and what people want and consumers as well.
Hmm.
So all of these things, they may look or seem a little iffy, or it's like vibes, or it's like, yeah, we're kind of using those language over here, but it's actually really just inner work and and being
Yeah.
able to kind of like stay true
Yeah.
and with that be able to do your best work.
Yeah. Very true.
And yeah, it's actually a message I don't think a lot of people emphasize and talk about enough, because there's just so much, especially in Singapore, so much emphasis on salary, so much emphasis on
Yeah.
skills, so much emphasis on prestige and the positioning, but people don't talk
Yeah.
about like, does this work spark joy?
Yeah.
And that's
It's
such a Marie
true.
Kondo thing.
No, it's true. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is, but it's true.
yeah. So yeah, it's an awesome way to wrap up the conversation. Lots of nuggets of wisdom, and I think for listeners who are thinking, hey, what's the designing for global products? I think there's so much lessons Jill have shared in her experiences. Even though we didn't go specifically into localization and things like that, but yeah, it's really about the foundations and the essence of what is the precondition to build global products. And I hope this has been a meaningful conversation for you, Joe, just as it has been for me.
Super fun to chat, Daylon. So glad that we can just like, I know we brought it everywhere, but like I'm so glad to just get to chat with you. Thank you for
Yeah,
this.
and thank you for your time.